I'm in the process of removing the block capacitors for restuffing. At first I was going to put sticky labels on them all, take reference photographs so I would know how to put them back in. Then I noticed that there's actually a number embossed on the side of each capacitor, so that's enough of a reference, I think, because they're all unique part numbers. There's a metal box cap. Now before I can remove them, I need to unsolder them. What I've been using is first a desoldering pump. It's a metal tube with a spring inside and a Teflon tip. You cock it by pressing a spring. There's a push button on the side. Simultaneously heat the joint and push this button. It'll suck up most of the solder. The remaining solder I remove with a bit of solder wick. Press the braid up against the joint, heat it, and it'll wick away the solder. And then I'll tease apart the wires that are wrapped around with a small screwdriver or a pocket knife or a dental pick. The reason I don't want to just clip these out is I'm going to be reusing some of these. Some of these resistors test fine, the mica caps are okay, so I'll just be wrapping them back around once I restuff this block. So I've got 2 out, I've got 4 more to go. I just sucked the solder off of this joint and now I need to clean the device out. Do that by just plunging it back down, and you'll see it spits out the solder, so I got a fair amount out. Occasionally you should unscrew this too and clean out the insides. I'll show you why. It's quite nasty in there. I unscrewed the end and the spring came right out. You can see all the bits of solder that were stuck to it, and there's still a bunch more inside. The problem is that there's lubrication on this, so the spring mechanism slides easily, but that attracts all the solder. Basically I just tap it out. I'm not going to attempt to clean it all out because it'll just get dirty again, but I want to get enough out such that the mechanism slides easily, doesn't get fouled up. I've finished removing all the bakelite block capacitors, and then I removed the tone control, which just had a single wire going to it, which is rubber insulated wire, which is pretty nasty stuff because it generally doesn't hold up well over time, and you can see here it's pretty well all disintegrated and fallen away, leaving a bare wire exposed. So I'll be replacing this entire wire. The other wires are cotton cloth covered and they're in pretty good shape, so I'll be reusing those. To remove the inside of these bakelite blocks, I'm using a heat gun. On the low it's about 600 watts and the high about 1200 watts. And the insides are already getting kind of gooey, so with a bit more heating they should come out. There's what was hiding inside underneath all that tar. So once that got soft, I prized it out with a toothpick, and here is capacitor. So I'll have to do a bit more cleaning to get all that goo out, and then maybe use a little lacquer thinner to clean it up. Then I can put a new capacitor inside, and I'll be good to go on that one. Something I should have mentioned is before I heated it up, I did unsolder the leads on the other side. See these fine wires down in here? Those are the actual capacitor leads. If you unsolder and clip those, then when you heat the other side, you can slide it all out. And here's those leads going to this capacitor. If you don't remember to unsolder those, the capacitor is going to be a bit more stubborn to get out. Here's the aftermath of cleaning out those old capacitors. 1 or 2 of them appeared to be kind of blown out on the ends like this guy. And if you recall, one of them was bypassed externally with this capacitor, so these can definitely go bad. Here's the tubs. Some of them came out cleaner than others, and I'll have to clean off the residual tar. Not really a problem. Some of it you can just flake off, the rest I'll use solvent on. The tone control was even easier. I just applied a bit of pressure and it just popped out in 2 sections. So here's the 2 capacitors that were inside, which are those 2 on the tone control, one fixed and one switchable. And as far as the metal box, I pried up the tabs on one end and applied pressure at the other, and it just started to slide right out. Here it is slid out all the way. I unwrapped the paper around it and it just revealed another tar block. There must be 5 capacitors embedded inside of there. So, time to clean all this up and start mounting the new capacitors. I've been doing some work on the tuning capacitor. I used some navel jelly to get the worst of the rust off, and I gave it a bath in some heavy-duty cleaner and degreaser and rinsed all that off really well and then dried it with a hairdryer. Now I want to take it apart a bit further. There's actually a sort of like a 3-to-1 gear reduction inside here. Although actually I think it's what they call planetary drive. There's some ball bearings in here. So when you make one rotation on the shaft, it only does a partial rotation on this part. Well, it's kind of stiff. I'm sure all the grease in there is dried up and it's full of goop. So I got to take a couple screws off here and remove this nut on the back. And then we can take a closer look what's going on inside there. If you ever do something like this, be very, very careful. Otherwise, you will lose those ball bearings. And you do not want to do that because you'll have a very hard time finding replacements. There were 3 ball bearings up front underneath that cover, which has some dried grease on it. That's the kind of stuff I want to clean out. Here's one of the ball bearings. And there's just one on the back that was riding against this. To get that out. And here's the actual shaft itself. It's cut as on a curve, and that's what would ride on the ball bearings. Finally, I've just about got all the rust off of this. I switched from navel jelly to this Rust-Oleum. It's a little bit more aggressive, but it's more liquidy, so I have to kind of keep brushing it to keep it applied to the right area. So just a few black specks left down there, then it'll be all gone. Then I'll have to get off all this residue, neutralize it, clean the whole thing down really good. I'll polish it up a little bit and then start putting it back together. I finished cleaning up the capacitor, including the bearings, which I washed down with just some WD-40, cleaned off all the old grease and gunk. Now I'm remounting them and lubricating it with some white lithium grease, which has a really nice viscosity. I think it'll have a nice feel to it. Got a couple more bearings to pop back in and then put this cover plate on and tighten it down, and we'll see how it works. I packed the bearings and tightened down this pressure plate here. It turns out that you can actually vary the feel of this by tightening or loosening these screws. If you tighten them really tight, it makes the tuning shaft harder to turn. You loosen it up, it makes it easier to turn. But I found that, well, you can strike a happy balance. You don't want it too loose or it just feels sloppy. So right now it feels good. But there's one problem I have left. You can hear this if you listen closely. Plates are scraping at certain points. Now when I first got this, some of these plates were bent and I straightened them out pretty well, but there's still some rubbing. Now it turns out that the way this works is these movable plates are attached to the central shaft, which rides against this copper fork here, which is connected to the main body here. All that's grounded. So the body's grounded, the shaft's grounded, the movable plates are grounded. The other plates on the bottom here are stationary, and that is what gets fed out to these terminals here. On the other side, in addition to terminals, which are connected just straight through, so this terminal is exactly the same as this terminal here, so you can really use either one. But on this side there's also these guys, which are actually trimmer capacitors. So on this side there's a brass plate here, and there's a thin sheet of mica, and then the metal plate below is ground. And by adjusting the tension on this nut here, you can make slight tweaks to this capacitor. Likewise, there's one over here, but it's a much smaller piece of brass, so it's smaller capacitance. You can see that on the schematic here. So these capacitors are highlighted in yellow, all 4 of these. That's the 4 in this tuning capacitor. The ones with the dashed lines, those are the main tuning capacitors, the movable plates, and the ones in parallel with them are those trimmer caps. Well, it turns out that not only do these screws down here hold on these terminal connections, but they also secure those stationary plates. If you loosen these up, you can actually move those stationary plates a little bit side to side. So I think if I loosen them and carefully adjust these, I can eliminate all that scraping. Oh right, that's much better. No scraping at all. Here it is with the dial pointer reattached. The way this works is the dial pointer stays stationary. There's a light bulb that shines behind it, and the dial scale is attached to the shaft, and that actually moves. So as you turn and tune this, that needle throws a shadow, and you can read the numbers off here. I've secured the dial scale to the tuning shaft and put the knob back on and set up a flashlight behind it, so I think you can see how that works now. So the only thing I've left to do on this is to straighten out that warp. I did put some weight on this for a while and it is better. I think with a bit more weight and maybe a little bit of heat, I will be able to completely flatten that out. Otherwise, I'm really happy with the way this turned out. The action is really nice and smooth.